Welcome to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and I love to do podcasts. I love to do this show. You guys know that I start off every show with telling you how fun this is for me. So folks, thank you for tuning in today. We have an amazing guest for you today, and I cannot wait to talk to her. It seems that we're doing a great job of getting some of the top women in cannabis, and I would argue that this is one of the top women in cannabis. We won't go that far. We're not an official publication, so we don't have a ranking, but I listened to her story, and I would equate her to a hero in this business because she's fighting for all the underdogs, and I'm really excited to get into her story. But as always, at first, let me bumble through all the stuff you have to look forward to coming up. Later this week, we have my good friend, Halston Trabuco from Hogan Law Group, formerly Halston Puchek. I'm excited to speak with her. Halston and I have been friends for about 2 years now. Truly an awesome person in this industry, is always there to help me out. She produces the Hogan Minute, so of course we're going to talk podcasting, marketing, all that great stuff. Next week, another top woman in cannabis, Jessica Billingsley from Akerna. After that, we're going to take a break from Elevate Your Grind, and I'm going to go back to my normal duties with Cannabis Lab. I will be moderating a panel on cannabis beverages. We've got potentially 4 CEOs for you, but in the meantime, we've got Cynthia Solarizada from House of Saka. We've got Duma, I always get your last name wrong. I love you so much. Duma Wondersuch from Province Brands. And we have Eric Schnell from Mood 33. So really excited to talk about cannabis beverages and their place in the overall market. That's something I'm always interested in. Following week on October 27th, we have Dan Berman from Cannabis BPO, and then another gentleman who's been a long time industry leader here, Paul Rosen, who's the current CEO of 1933 Industries, but you guys might know him as the founder of the Kronos Group. And then I'm really excited to announce on November 9th, there's going to be some shows in between Paul and the Nice Show, but on November 9th, we're going to do our first ever cooking edition of Elevate Your Grind. How we're going to pull it off, I don't know. Shadi Rami, the author of the first hemp cookbook that's printed on hemp paper, was nice enough to come on the show. We're going back and forth about the recipes we're going to make. Going through that cookbook, I can tell you, I'm having a hard time just picking one. So maybe we'll do some appetizers for you. We'll do some desserts. We're going to put a Thanksgiving theme around this. So this way, we're not going to mess with the main meal on Thanksgiving. That's tradition. I don't think we're going to be able to get too many people to add hemp or cannabis into those meals, but maybe some appetizers, maybe some desserts. And you're going to see me fumble around the kitchen. So definitely tune in for that on November 9th. All right, enough fluff. My guest today is one of the top women in cannabis. She has a ton of positions, as she should be, because she's very influential. And like I said, she fights for the underdog. Currently, she's the CEO of Alira Holistic Healthcare. She's the chairwoman of the board of managers and CEO of Women Grow. And there's a few more titles in there that we'll get into. Please welcome Chanda Macias. Chanda, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm coming from the great state of Louisiana right now, and we were able to survive the last hurricane.
You guys, unfortunately, are taking the hurricane title from us down here in Florida. I don't want to say I feel bad because we've had so much experience, 30 years with it, that like in Florida, if it's not a category 3 or higher, we're like, okay, that's a Tuesday because our infrastructure is built to handle it. But Louisiana, not so much. So I'm glad you guys made it through again.
One thing I can tell you what's interesting is that all these years, people talked about how cannabis has destroyed communities, how they have impacted, adversely impacted different minority populations, especially the Black man's, pipeline to prison and mass incarceration. But what I can say is that we're creating a new narrative. And so we reached out to Good 360, which is a nonprofit, and they're donating over 15 pallets and thousands of products to Alira Holistic on Thursday so we can distribute to the city of Lake Charles that was completely devastated by Hurricane Laura and Delta. So we're doing good, and we're rebuilding the name in our community in the name of cannabis. So this is just one of many things that we are destined to do in our future. And I just pray that our other cannabis leaders see it's time to really change this narrative that cannabis is truly about compassion. And we need to definitely reach out to those that need compassion during this time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's funny, just the wording of something you said, that people say cannabis destroys communities. I think that that's wrong. I think, and I learned this kind of from listening to you, that cannabis has been used to destroy communities as a tool, right? And I think that's something that we're certainly learning now. And we'll definitely get into as we're talking about this podcast. But I want, actually, we're going to get into it a lot as we go through this podcast. I want to go all the way back to the beginning, because your story alone of getting into this industry demonstrates a lot of the issues that minorities and women and other people face when getting into this industry, especially given the credentials that you already had as a person, as an accomplished person, right? An MBA, a PhD, you had worked for Palmolive, you launched $2 billion brands before you even looked at cannabis. So, give me the first decision here, right? You sound like you had a pretty successful career, and you were working with Howard University. You were I think you were coordinating the STEM education there. You were helping a lot of people, and you had all these accomplishments under your belt, and you decided that you wanted to go into cannabis. And the end of this story is you became the second woman in the country to own a dispensary, but it took a few hurdles to get there. So what led you to want to enter this space?
You know, what's interesting about when you said that, despite whoever people think I am, society always told me I wasn't good enough. It's a very painful and hurtful thing to share because, we're always taught to think that, oh, we'll get educated, we'll work hard, we'll do whatever is necessary to become leaders. And despite doing all that, we're still told by society it's never good enough. And the struggle is a real one, and it's just not me that goes through this every day. It's people who look like me, people in the same social economic situation. And when I think about my starting out in cannabis, what I think a lot of people don't know is that I've always been a healthcare advocate. I started by focusing on women. I studied the BRCA1 gene in breast cancer. And then when I graduated from Howard undergrad, I went to the graduate school and focused on prostate cancer metastasis to bone. And during these studies, which was very interesting, was that I learned that medical marijuana did have medicinal benefits to helping cancer patients. And so I went to my leadership at Howard University, my advisors, and asked them, could I have this conversation around cannabis? And they explained to me, if you want to have this conversation, just know that it comes with incarceration, and we can't support that here. So with that, I always knew that it had a place in natural medicine, but I was denied that right, which to study it, which I'm so grateful later on in my story, I was able to circle back with. But instead, I went into my career path, constantly trying to find where my place is. I was recruited from Colgate Palmolive Company in my third year of graduate school. So they were pushing me to graduate and to go to New Jersey, which I did. And that's where I launched with our teams $2 billion products, have about 10 world patents, 3 US patents, tons of scientific compilations, journals, etc. And Colgate Palmolive was gracious enough to fast track me for my MBA, and I received it in supply chain management, and graduated, did very well. And then the opportunity opened up. The opportunity said, basically in Washington, D.C., that there were licenses available. and for a medical marijuana dispensary. And I said to myself, I have to go for this.
All
And
right.
um, I sat down for over 4 months and 20 pounds, and I wrote my application for a medical marijuana dispensary. Now, one thing I need to say is that my education did precede me. I had wrote a dissertation. I had written plenty of grants. Today, I've written over 10 million in NIH grants, NSF, and Department of Energy grants. So for me, writing a proposal wasn't an issue. It was more about the finances. How do I
Yeah.
finance this? Also, how to do it. You have to understand from my perspective, when I jumped into the market, it was only 10 states legalized. So right now, I've seen an evolution of the cannabis market threefold, and it's night and day to what it used to be. But when I actually was awarded the license, it didn't come easy. The struggle was that I had to find real estate.
Yeah.
I had to pay for real estate, and being a mother of four and paying my mortgage each month and having to balance that out and pay mortgage for medical marijuana application and the real estate in DuPont Circle, Washington, D.C., I had to decide which one I was going to pay.
And,
And
and and
so
if you don't mind me interjecting, you had to acquire this real estate not knowing whether or not you were going to get the license. So it was kind of like, okay, well, we have to get this building. And then what happens if we don't get the license? So that's a huge risk in itself that you're taking.
it's a huge risk in itself, knowing that you have to hold the location, but it's the risk of also being judged by your family members, your peers, your community saying, why would you put your family security, financial security at risk and be so careless about this? And I didn't have a choice. No one would invest in me, and I couldn't understand why. I was highly educated. Most rooms that I enter in today, I am still the most educated, and yet and still it's hard for me to find the necessary opportunities um, to be successful. I've entered rooms where I have worked and I have a vast amount of experience, and yet and still, because I'm a woman, I'm a minority, the doors continue to close. And so when I thought about who was going to invest in me, if I didn't do it myself, I would be exactly in the same place that I started out with. And so I have an amazing husband that supported my vision. Um, he stood the fire with me, and we, in retrospect, we were able, with the gamble, we were able to win the license, but I did lose my home. I
Oh,
couldn't
no.
afford both of them, and it was tough. My kids were raised there. Yeah, it was really hard, but I just knew that if God gave me the opportunity to do this, I would do it right. I would do responsible for the patient. I would focus on healthcare needs and benefits. But what's most important also is that while I'm doing good, I could then start to look at vulnerable populations that were adversely affected. And I'm not just talking about social justice reform, even though mass incarceration is the byproduct of it. I'm thinking about the veteran population that have been denied access to medical marijuana and some of the healing benefits of it. I think about the parents that had to treat their children with medicine from the illicit market that they don't know if it's tested or even would pass any type of testing. I, thought about what it looked like day to day for the people that I fought to be a part of in my cancer research and giving them safe, efficacious, and affordable products. And that's what propelled me, holding on to that truth. And I'm so grateful that I believed in myself, even though it was hard to, when so many people are around you that tell you that you're not worthy, that, you're not good enough. And, sometimes that kind of clicks and resonates with you, even if you're in a better position. Again, I knew who I was, but it was hard still being able to come out and live my truth. So that's why I do what I do. That's why I continue to share this message, because I know so many women, and I know so many minorities out there. I'm an African American woman of Latino descent that have the education and the experience and have the influence to do so much more in this industry. And I would have like begged at the fact to have someone say, I'm here to help you. I'm here to partner with you and work with you. And, truthfully, that's where I joined the intersection of Women Grow. Um, and Women Grow is the largest networking opportunity for women in the cannabis and hemp industry. And they've been established since 2014. And in 2015, when I entered, I had no one that was willing to mentor me in the industry. And when I say mentorship, where to get a bank account,
Yeah.
what software is preferred, who will talk to me, anyone who could give me guidance. And there was a local chapter in Washington, D.C., and I walked in and they said, oh, we have people in Portland, Oregon that will give you all the answers. And that's where I started to find what I call my tribe. I then definitely focused on outreach to other, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, M4MM, and to make sure that I could support all the communities that meant something to me. But it was challenging starting out, and it continues to be challenging in different ways. But what I can tell you is that once I was able to get the license, what I didn't understand is that if you're not a vertical operation, meaning that if you don't have a grow, processing, and dispensing license, you become dependent upon others for your success. And I was faced with that when I met one of my growers, and no one would sell their products to me. Out of the 9 at the time in Washington, D.C., I was able to get one Black grower to give me 2 ounces of Buffalo Soldier. And I could not believe that after I fought long and hard, I couldn't get into the industry because no one would sell product to me.
That, that
And
that's crazy to me that people wouldn't sell to you, because it's not like you're asking for financing and they're taking a risk. I mean, they're going to make money off of you. That blows my mind that people would do that. I mean, obviously I know it happens, but listen, I like to think I had a very nice upbringing. I like to think, when it comes to this show, I don't care what you look like, what your background is, what you believe in, what you identify as, or anything else. If you've got a great story and you're an entrepreneur that has half the clout that someone like you does, I want you on the show, right? And I'd like to think that the majority of the world is that way, but they're not. So hearing your story, like, to me, it opened my eyes, and it hurt me that I wasn't aware of a lot of this as a person, that, I look at this industry and all this shit's going on, and people aren't really talking about it, which is another reason why I wanted you on so bad. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but it's just, the more and more I listen to the things that you had to go through, it blows my mind, because I've been in the investment world, and I've been in the room of family offices and everything else. And on paper, if literally we just had your resume on paper and what you wanted to do, I don't see why half the room wouldn't want to back it, right? But it's different, I guess. Just people suck, and I don't know how to say that beyond that. But go on, talk to us, continue the story. Like I I don't even know what to say. Like, I want to apologize. I want to help you and all this stuff, but it's an amazing story.
You know, it's one of those things where I don't know why people choose not to support minority or women-led businesses or even veteran-led businesses for that matter. It's, you know, to me, it's a different type of segregation, and I didn't realize it existed until I entered this cannabis world and it was so divided. I always thought it was built on compassion and natural medicine and helping others until I met the private investment firms and realized that someone like me is they're predatorial, and I have to be careful on how I'm able to proceed in those waters. So the high point here is that I found one other grower that decided that he would sell to me. But he said, I'm going to sell you 10 strains at $6,500 a pound, which we know that's not the going rate. And I'm going to make you buy all 10 of them. So the only way I could actually buy was that if I came up with $65,000 more on top of that to be able to have product. And I had no choice. I had no choice but to find the money. That's when you start going to those credit cards and checking your balances. And that's where you go and start asking friends and family, please. But thank goodness I had a 401k at Colgate-Palmolive, and that cashed out immediately. So no security at all. No home, no 401k, nothing.
We're all in more than
All
anyone else.
all in, and there was no way I could go except for up. When you're at the bottom, there's no other way. And one thing is true about my journey through Howard University was that I focused always on education. And I was able to educate my patients to the fact that I had over 90% retention rates in the dispensary. Today, I have the largest market in Washington, D.C. I've seen over in our team over tens and tens of thousands of patients. I have over 5 years of aggregated data that says that I know what helps patients. So, you know, I look at those struggles and I really focused about what is true or who my authentic self was. And I went from 2 patients to 15 patients. And then when we got 250 patients, we were like, this is the best day ever. We are growing. And more importantly, when we started to hit the thousands, we were like, what we're doing is right. And we're making sure we're at the low prices in the city. We're making sure that the dispensary's National Holistic Healing Center in Washington, D.C. The next thing we did is I'm changing the laws. I want to give all states reciprocity in Washington, D.C. We changed the law. People who come to D.C. with a medical marijuana card can now buy medicine there. They don't have to
Really?
illegally. Oh, yes.
Can I buy with a Florida license?
Yes, that's one of our biggest customers.
I am going to add DC to the list of places that I will vacation
You,
now.
do you understand the purpose of that? It gives you access, and it's legal access. We don't have to go to the illicit market. And this is what it's about, safe access to our patients. And this is what I continue to fight for every day. And so when I was able to operate and to pull through that struggle, and then to help other women like myself or other minorities, what I realized is that I think that I'm out there sharing my story because it's showing an example to others. But what I realized is that when I meet individuals after I shared that story, it's supporting me. It really comes back to the necessary support I need from my community to keep me going. And I wouldn't be able to continue to do what I'm doing without their support. Um, it's hard. It's hard when you're in, you can be in the South like we are, and there's different things we're not aware of. But one thing I am is that the patient will always be first. And I will continue to push that truth on any platform that I'm on. So it's a constant struggle. It is being the first African American woman with in multiple states. It's a lot of work, and we have complete diversity. And I think what people don't understand is that diversity inclusion means everyone. I mean, we have male, female, we have all nationalities, we have disabled, we have veterans, we have LGBT, we have everyone that's represented, and I support them all. And that's what true love and compassion, or what I call cannabis, is all about.
That's incredible. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, your passion for this plant, for this industry, it's just so transparent when you talk, and you can see how emotionally invested you are in this. And I think, to me, you were looking for someone like yourself, and you couldn't find it, and you just became the person that you were looking for. And now you're throwing the ladder back down to so many other people. And I think beyond just being an inspiration to women and minorities, I think if everybody could step back and looked at your story just as an entrepreneur, you were dealing with stigma from the community, from family, from people that were close to you, from friends. You're dealing with stigma from so many other angles. You had so many roadblocks. You had to go all in, and there's so many things the universe was kind of saying, like, you're not going to do this, you can't do this, and you just said, no, I'm going to do it, I have to do it, this is what I was meant to do. And you fought tooth and nail, got funding, funded yourself, lost your house, maxed out credit cards. I commend your husband for being an amazing person to be there, because I don't know if I lost the house. I tell you, my wife's upstairs putting our daughter to bed right now, and she sometimes watches these episodes. Honey, I don't know if you'd stay with me if I lost the house. I kind of understand, but I say that as a joke. But how, through all of that, I mean, what people I don't think realize, and part of the reason why I do this show, and it's a little bit of an education for myself, is the emotional journey that an entrepreneur goes through, and the emotional journey that you went through, that I imagine, like, we see you today, and I listen to you on the Green Rush podcast and all these places that you are, and I got introduced to you through mutual friends. And from the outside in, it looks like, hey, she's doing great, everything's this. But along this journey, I'm sure there were some really low points where you're like, what am I doing? Is this the right thing? Did I make a mistake? Where do you dig deep? And I'm sorry for going so deep here, because I'm just really interested, as someone who wants to be an entrepreneur. How do you dig deep and just say, you know what, this is my passion, this is my journey, this is what I'm meant to do. Screw what everybody else says. I'm gonna make it.
You have to know who you are, and what propels you. I'm working on this project right now because it's not an emotional journey that's over. I went from pretty much a completely fought hard in legalizing in Washington, D.C., and now I'm in Louisiana, where I'm starting all over. We were fortunate enough to get legislation pushed on August 1st that any doctor in the nation can recommend medical marijuana here for any condition, any ailment, for non-residents, with delivery service and telemedicine. I busted my ass doing it, and supporting the people who wanted to make it happen. And we're like hours away of getting medicine to be allowable in the school systems here. And why? The truth of the matter is that recently we launched the product called Hope. And this is
With Erica Daniels?
Yes.
We had Erica on the show.
Erica, we've been working together. When Erica and I started to work together, it was in Pennsylvania. and we were arguing about. I said, I think we can't use the MCT oil as a base because it's a nut. And then she's like, no, you're right. We need to focus on different forms. And when we had that conversation years and years ago, again, I always support women and with the true story. And when I saw how Hope, I had a parent come in and said, my child hasn't talked, he's 6 years old, hasn't said a word to me ever. And then the other day he said hello. I can't imagine being the parent for that moment. I'm a mother of four, and I know what that looks like. And something that you struggle, that you have no control with, and then you can provide someone with a healthcare option that works. That's a blessing. And I'm so grateful that Erica came forward and gave us the opportunity to work with Zalera and Alera Holistic to make this happen. And so now we're able to provide the product throughout the state to all those parents. And they'll have the opportunity to see if it's a choice that works for them. When I was working with Women Grow in our leadership conference, we would have parents come there and they would talk about their refugees from their states because their states hadn't legalized, and that they've had to move to Denver in California so that, in fact, they can give their child a health care option there. And one thing I can say is that families should not be divided that way. It's so unfair. It is an emotional burden, it's a financial burden. And one thing I can say that PA had it right, which is to allow safe harbor for those states that didn't allow the growth or of a medical marijuana program. And PA did that before they actually opened their doors because of the demand from parents and mothers. And you can't put a policy between a mother and a child. If a parent feels that they can help their child, they're going to do it by all
Right.
means. And so, again, the passion is a real passion, and it's stimulated by all the amazing patients that tell you these stories about how it works. And I say stories because if I were to say it was research or something where I'm tracking, it's illegal, which doesn't make sense. We should be able to research it here in the United States and not feel like we're doing something wrong when we've seen so many patients with so many different qualities of life that's been improved from this medicine.
Let me ask you a quick question, because I agree with you. You know, when I first got into cannabis, I was just a someone who used it to disconnect, a recreational user, if you will. As I got older, as I got into the industry, I saw what I like to say, the brighter side of this industry, and meeting people like you and Erica and Dr. Dare and everybody else. And, learning about the true medical side of this and hearing these stories about parents helping kids and parents themselves and different patients. I can't tell you how many times somebody has gone on this show, and the reason that they got into the cannabis industry is because a family member of theirs was going through a rough time, and cannabis was either the solution that helped them or at least made it better until the end, right? And you hear so many of these stories, and you and I hear them all the time, but I don't think the general public does. Do you think as an industry that we kind of, I don't want to say give up the fight for federal legalization, but at least right now turn our focus towards descheduling, so we have the ability to do the research, collect it, and make the proper argument with research backed, even though who knows if that's going to be considered with given the state of the world right now. But should we focus on descheduling so we can at least allow research to make the proper argument and show this side of the industry? Because when we talk about the cannabis industry, and I think if you were to approach any person on the street or wherever you are, all they think about is Cheech and Chong. They think about joints. They think about bongs and that. And I've said this 100 times on the show. I talked to Steve D'Angelo. I've talked to so many people. When this industry reaches maturity, whenever that's going to happen, that's only going to be a small fraction. The adult use market is going to be the smallest part of the industry, in my opinion. So again, I've circled away from my question, but should we focus on descheduling versus federal legalization right now to at least build the case for federal legalization?
I have to back up just a little bit and be who I am, but I know people say a recreational market or recreational use. Recreational use to me is an undiagnosed condition that you don't know what you're treating yourself for, but you're getting, and I think that's some of the education that has to go into this. So I don't think you're a recreational patient. I think you were definitely a medical patient, and you were.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. I think I make the argument that with anything, there is a very, very small subset of people that will use this purely recreationally. But having said that, if it wasn't this, they would use something else. And that's just, when we go back to the stigma of the lazy stoner, I think when you look at those people, they're lazy people. They're just people who would be like that regardless. And, the stigma is associated with it because it's convenient. But I'd agree with you. When I first started using cannabis, it helped me sleep better. It helped me disconnect from work. In certain situations, it would help me focus, right? And this was back when I was just going to the guy, in the parking lot or wherever and saying, and he's like, hey man, I got these 9 strains. And I was, whatever, just give me a bag, dude, right? So I agree with you. I didn't mean to say that, but I think you're 100% right that the people who are using it recreationally and are not abusing it, yeah, they are undiagnosed medical patients.
And I think that when I go to the conversation of descheduling, I love the fact that you know that I'm here for the underdog. And there's consequences to descheduling. Descheduling would not necessarily allow the underdog to participate in social equity. And
Yeah.
so, what it would allow is big pharmaceutical companies to enter into the marketplace and conduct the research that we're speaking on. Now, what I would love to see is that if there was legislation in place that could deschedule and allow still for social equity amongst minorities, women, and other vulnerable populations with certain partnerships with pharmaceutical companies or other big money companies, that would be more acceptable. But I will tell you that a social equity applicant needs 3 things. They first need the opportunity. And the opportunity usually exists within the states that say that we're going to allow X amount of licenses for minority owned businesses or women owned businesses. The other thing is that they need the guidance and the mentorship. Again, like myself, it wasn't enough that I won the license, wasn't enough that I had that piece of paper. I needed to know what to do with that piece of paper. And I needed to know how to run the operations. And a lot of these skill sets still have to evolve within that social equity community. So mentorship and guidance are so important. I think about reaching out to all these accountants who have focused on the 280E. They need to pair up with the social equity person to be there for them for that mentorship and guidance, and even part of their team. And then the last part of a team, which is really the fuel that will bring you to the next level, is the financing. So if we see legislation that will be inclusive of those 3 items, which we're pushing for, I think that descheduling would be the only way that I would support that, because I need to make sure it's an inclusive environment. And it's not enough to talk about it. As you said previously, I'm with the National Cannabis Roundtable in Washington, D.C. I'm the first vice chair. I fight for our rights in the cannabis industry every day. And right now before us is safe banking. And some people will say, well, Safe Banking Act is about access of our private equity firms to be able to enter into the industry with their protections. And what I'm saying is that no, it would allow small business loans and legalized funding sources for my minority and women applicants. So for me, I need to find a way that I can create a pipeline. So when you do have a social equity license, that you have the mentorship and the money to be successful.
You know, it's funny. I actually think that there are a lot of minorities and women out there that have the education, the capability, and the wherewithal. And honestly, they really just need number three, the funding, right? And to your point, it's because in all these states, the barrier to entry is absolutely ridiculous to get into this industry. And there's no guarantees. Like you said, you had to have real estate. Plus, there's a licensing fee associated with it or an application fee associated. I was looking when Florida passed medical marijuana down here. I was very tied into the nursery industry down here. My dad spent some time in there, and I'm like, this is my time. This is my ticket. It's a $60,000 application fee. I come from a pretty middle of the road background, but I can tell you I'm not getting a loan from my parents or anybody in my family for 60 grand just to apply for a license. Considering they only gave out 14 licenses the first go round, wasn't going to happen, right? And I imagine there's a lot of people who are smarter than me, more qualified than I am, and have less access to that funding, right? And then fast forward now, you want to buy a Florida license on the secondary market, $35 million to open your doors. I mean, I don't have an MBA, but I imagine they would teach you not to start $35 million in a hole before you have a single business expense. So, I agree with you, and thank you for educating me on the descheduling thing, because it was just an idea I had in the back of my head, done no research on it, and you opened my eyes around, yes, this is a possible way that the pharmaceutical companies can come in and take this industry away from the people who are trying to make it the way that it should be. So, that's why I do have these conversations, because I have this wild idea that like, oh, this sounds great in my head. And then you're like, nope, it's not. And it sounds good, but here's the reason why. So thank you for that. Um, Talk about safe banking and keeping, I agree with you. I learned through the course of doing this show that when we say they don't have access to the banking system, it's things like not being able to get a mortgage on a dispensary location or the SBA loans and everything else. And that could truly change this industry. I talk time and time again about how I think 10 years from now, 15 years from now, the amount of case studies that are going to come from the cannabis space because of all the restrictions placed on these entrepreneurs it's going to be infinite, right? So I'm really excited for that to happen. What are some of the other restrictions you think need to be changed to make this industry the way it should be? Because I have this kind of weird idea in my head that this industry being what it is, that we have the opportunity to make it somewhat of a model industry that other industries should look at and be like, we need to be more like them, more inclusive, more accepting, because you're right, the theory of cannabis that is natural, holistic, welcoming, accepting, but maybe it's not being put into practice.
It's so true. And the barriers are unbelievable. I think when people jump into the industry, they don't understand the roadblocks. You can't be on social media and sponsor your ads. Even if you're in CBD, you can't have commercials, you can't advertise. I think about going back to banking, safe banking. My patients have to use cash. I mean, this is 2020. Who uses cash anymore? Even in the midst of COVID-19, they don't want us using that. And we're forced. We're in a closed industry. We need access to banking in terms of credit card, debit cards, so our patients can be safe. I think about even what it looks like that in states that are legalized, there's some jurisdictions that have not decriminalized medical marijuana, and so people are still being convicted for it. And so when I think about changing legislation on the state level, I think that Decriminalizing it is an important narrative, something that I've been pushing right now in the city of Shreveport, Louisiana. We've been working with the mayor, Adrian Perkins, there on writing that legislation. In 2016, we were able to get it passed in the city of New Orleans, but there's a lot of cities in between that will still prosecute you. And we have to be careful and mindful of that. So when you think about open access, it's about truly making sure there's no criminal penalties or incarceration when it comes to that. And then you talk about law enforcement, training, really changing the mindset, making sure that the law enforcers in your community understand that it is legal. It's legal on the state level. There's, the Cole memo that keeps certain protections with the state and federally as well. And there's different ways that with education, we can change the narrative. But I will tell you that some cities are definitely more progressive than others. And we have to individually, collectively continue to be personal leaders and decide that what is best to change the narrative in your community. One thing I can tell you about is that if you believe in the medicine, sometimes you don't understand how your word of mouth has an impact on your microenvironment. I just feel like so many people don't want to talk about their success stories, even though they
Yeah.
use cannabis. And I think it's time to get that out of the closet and share the fact that this shouldn't be stigmatized and we should focus on the benefits, the healing that really comes from it. And I think until we continue to change that narrative, we'll continue to get pushback. But you have to remember, pushback is always not what it looks like. Pushback could be from big pharma paying lobbyists to keep us ignorant of the benefits um, of
Yeah.
medical marijuana. It could be the law enforcers that don't want it in their community to say that let's keep this criminalized because we don't want it here. We want a reason for mass incarceration and to fund private prisons. You always have to find the money trail and who's fighting what for what reasons. Truly, the only reason I'm fighting is I want to give people a chance at life. That's it. It comes with its benefits. And I will say, my whole life purpose, I went to school to be a biomedical researcher. I never wanted to do anything else but to focus on the healthcare industry. And I'm staying true to that. And to date, I've trained thousands of medical doctors, PhDs, and MDs during my time at Howard University as the director of STEM education. And it's been the most gratifying work. I would take students over to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, or Mali, or Ghana, or Nigeria, and teach them about natural medicines over there. I'm just being true to who I am. And I pray that people can be true to who they are and to share their narrative and the impactful benefits of medical cannabis.
It sounds, your life sounds awesome and just so fulfilling. I mean, just getting to have all these great experience and educating people. You have to write a book at some point when not yet, because I feel like there's so much more in your journey that's going to happen. But at some point, I really hope you sit down and write a book and just tell this story from beginning to end and not listen. I know you're in Green Rush for an hour. You've been on this show for an hour and everything else. But I just, your journey should be so inspiring to people, just given your background, given everything that you've done and where you are now. And you talk about that you've always just wanted to focus on healthcare. And I think you're doing that more so now than ever, because who would have thought to be on the cutting edge of healthcare, you would look at an ancient solution, right? People have been using cannabis for thousands upon thousands of years. We put a stigma around it, and you're 100% right. The people who are using it, the people who have success stories from it, need to come out of the closet and share those stories. I mean, I give myself as an example. Even when I started this show back in January, until probably like 50 or 60 episodes in, and we're on 90 now, I would hesitate to talk about my own personal use and my experiences and everything else, because we're doing this live on Facebook, and I share it on my own personal Facebook page, and not everybody knows what I do, and not even my entire family knows what I do. But you know, the more and more I did this, the more and more I thought it was a disservice and disrespectful to people like you and Erica and everybody else who comes on the show and shares their story, for me to not be 100% transparent. And granted, I'm not Joe Rogan or Howard Stern or someone who has these millions of people audiences, but for the few thousand people that watch the show, I think it's my duty, and you know, to support the people that are on the show and talk about it. And I hope, you know, if someone like me who's in this little corner of the market can do it, that it inspires people that are bigger than I to do the same, right? And I love hearing I mean, I don't love hearing the stories, because a lot of them are sad and they're very touching, but I love hearing how beneficial that cannabis could be. And you would think that people would be more open-minded about it, given this whole trend now of, you know, plant-based diets and organic food and free range and all this stuff. Is everything's going back to stuff in its natural state. Why wouldn't medicine and wellness go back there? And funny enough, I wish I can tell you that I was educated by a doctor or physician, or even someone like you. The person who educated me on holistic wellness and natural wellness, two former football players, Ricky Williams and Evan Britton. Evan Britton's the one who educated me on the endocannabinoid system, right? And not a doctor, not anybody else. So I always find it crazy to me that this isn't being taught in medicine. And I don't remember if it was Dr. Dare or Steve D'Angelo, but we were saying, I feel like it's a disservice to doctors to not teach them about the endocannabinoid system, because it's like it's like a mechanic working on a car and not understanding how the oil system in the car works. You're missing an entire very important system of the body. You know, I know that you've partnered with universities. Do you see traditional education moving in this direction?
I definitely do see traditional education in the focus of the endocannabinoid system. Working with Southern University down in Louisiana has been, you know, a blessing, because I can start to think about curriculum, think about the education. But one thing I can tell you is that education doesn't have to be that formalized. I do believe in it, but you just, you know, inspired me by your story. You don't understand, like, when I hear your story, it comes back to let me know that we're doing something right. You know, we're connected in that mission. And you might have your corner and I have my corner, but there's many of us that are in our corners, and we're fighting for our rights, and we're fighting for that education and that freedom in this area. So just know that what you're doing is a blessing for us all. And when I think about formal education in the cannabis industry, there's less than 9 medical schools that actually teach the endocannabinoid system. And what people don't understand is that in our bodies itself, through evolution, we lost the ability to produce endogenous or cannabinoids that are in our body naturally. And so we have to reintroduce them in order to get homeostasis or a balance in life. If you don't, you will see disease in your body. And based on your genetic background, your body, etc., it'll express itself in different ways, whether it's cancer, multiple sclerosis, pain, ALS, Parkinson's. It's because your body's not balanced. It doesn't have the proper cannabinoids to stimulate the endocannabinoid system, which is the biggest system that manages all the rest of them. And so until conventional education can catch up with us in the holistic realm, there's going to always be that gap. And people are going to have to decide that, are they going to face their fears of the stigma, or they're going to seek the help that they deserve through medical cannabis options.
It's interesting. I want to ask you kind of a selfish question here, and I've asked it of a few guests. You know, you said you're a mother of four. You know, you're obviously a well-educated professional. When you say that you're usually the highest educated person in any room, even though this is a virtual room, yet much more educated, and definitely the highest educated person in this room. You know, I have a daughter who's 1 year old, and eventually I'm going to have the conversation with her and talk about what dad does and what industry dad's in. You know, I'm curious to know, as this is becoming more and more mainstream, how we talk to our children about this, right? Because it's you know, no one had to have that conversation with me. I discovered it on my own. In fact, you know, I was part of the generation where you're told to stay away from it. So, you know, I discovered cannabis on my own. I got into it. I didn't find it till later in life. And I don't know, you know, I hear stories like, yeah, it's okay for you to use, but maybe you should wait till you're 18, 20, 22, wait till the brain starts developing. But I know that there are younger kids that can use CBD, so maybe it's the this is a conversation that I really need to educate myself on to eventually have. So instead of doing the work myself, I'm just going to ask you.
You know, it's very interesting because I had this conversation. So I have kids at every spectrum. I have a 31-year-old, I have a 24-year-old, I have a 20-year-old, and I have a 10-year-old. Yet God played a nice joke on me with the 10-year-old. I thought I was done, but I'm not. Now, I pulled out my phone because my 10-year-old, the way I would talk to him about the medicine is different from how I would have the conversation with my older kids. And I talk about healthcare. For him, it's important that he understands that medical marijuana, or what we refer to as the medicine, it should be accessible to everyone. And in his, he had to write a little story about if you ran for president in 2020. And I'm gonna share this with you because he got it. And I wish more of us can get it. So
I'm
he
excited.
says, hello, my name is MJ, and I'm running for president in 2020. As your president, I will implement affordable health care. Next, I would dedicate a little bit more money to the poor in the stimulus bill. I also believe the poor should have more affordable health care. I will try to end COVID-19. I will put resources into climate change, and everywhere that's having bad hurricanes right now in Louisiana, it could change. I would get part of the stimulus bill to repair the damages, and I will also be trying to, excuse his language, to free people who were locked up unfairly or for nothing. I will make sure people have fair court cases, and I will help fix climate change and help stop racism and many other things. Vote for me for a fair country.
Wow. So if he's 10, he's got to be 35 for president. So unfortunately, you can't run this year, MJ, but I'll vote MJ 2036, I think, is the year, if I did the math correctly.
Yes, and the point is that I meet him where he is. Medicine or medical marijuana is medicine, and we want to make sure it's affordable and accessible to everyone. And that's how we have our dialogue. Now, my 21-year-old, who has true 21-year-old issues and a lot of anxiety, it's about properly, if you're going to choose that this is your healthcare issue, how I would teach you or educate you on how to use a product. So it wouldn't be that, oh, I can try a teacher, I can try this and that. No, that's not how helping patients look like. What it looks like is that, are you in an environment by yourself, or do you share an environment? If you're a mother, you can't really vaporize. You might need something that is less noisy or private to your use. So I need to line you with the proper form. Once I can get the form, I need to understand the true condition of your health care. meaning that if you have muscle spasms that spike like this rapidly and then drop off, you just need a medication that's for that duration of time. You don't need to over medicate and use something like edible, which will last 6 to 8 hours, is super powerful and might be too intoxicating. So you need to align your medicine directly with your healthcare needs and the form that is sustainable to your life. So my mothers that have terrible anxiety, they might take the tincture, which is the oral drops, and put a little bit in their water bottles, shake it up, and sip on it during the course of the day, and enjoy their child's soccer practice and don't have anxiety there. And that's how you properly learn how to microdose or dose and align the medicine to your lifestyle. You shouldn't try to sit there and use a vaporizer if it's not sustainable to you. And this is what we focus on, the true education of it. The other thing that we have to think of is that not all cannabis is the same. There's different strains of cannabis that will align with specific conditions. And if it works, then you will continue to use it as a medicine and you will learn how to dose it properly so you're functional and you're your best version of yourself. And that's what we're here for.
Well, thank you for that. That is actually extremely helpful and extremely educational. And I can't believe that we've been talking for over an hour already. So I have to go. But Chanda, thank you so much for doing this. And before we let you go, I know you're involved in a lot of things. So let's plug everything. Let's promote. And of course, we'll put it when this comes out on YouTube in about 2 weeks. We'll make sure everything's in the description. But let's get all the promotions out there.
Well, the truth of the matter is that this promotion is about having everyone out there to hear the story and know that you're enough. You can actually go out there and you can carve your little circle like we've carved our circle and continue to grow and expand in this industry. Whether you're a healthcare advocate, whether you want to be in the industry itself, or if you want to change legislation, please just engage. And if you have questions, I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. Chanda Macias. But I would say if you're a woman, Women Grow is great, womengrow.com. I have interfaced with different minority cannabis business association, as well as M4MM. Those are great resources for you.
We love Ross.
We love Ross. We love Ross. And so, again, if there's any way I can help, just feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. But truly, the plug is about you. It's your turn. And, put aside your fears, like I've had to do myself. Put on your big girl draws and change the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we will absolutely have you back because there's so much more of your story that I want to explore. Apparently, we can't do it within an hour. We may not be able to do it in 2 hours, but we'll definitely have you back for sure. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody at home. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. Tune in Thursday. We're going to be at 7 p.m. Right here, facebook.com/Cannabis Group. Of course, if you want to see the entire library of shows, you can go to youtube.com/Elevate Your Grind. And we will see you Thursday, folks.